So, this is the crux of the course in terms of what you imagine, future climate change. When we say global warming, we are always thinking that is it already here, what it is doing, and where it is going. So, this is the main focus of this section. Obviously, when we say future climate change, we need to figure out how the greenhouse gases will change into the future. So, what are the methods that are used to project changes in carbon dioxide into the future, let us say up to 2100 in about 80 years. So, this is the emission. What are the assumptions made there in terms of population growth, technologies, energy production and use, and what we will do about reducing our impact on climate change and so on. So, for that obviously we go back and rely on the models. We put all this information into the models and we want to know not only how temperature will change globally, but also locally, how precipitation will change in your backyard, how sea level will rise, and how the vegetation, crop yields, human health, water supply, food supply and so on will be affected. That is the main goal of making future projections, not just temperature, but everything that means in terms of the cascades into the system, including the risks and impacts of global warming on various sectors like unique and threatened ecosystems, extreme climate events and so on. And when we make these future projections of CO2 change, you can see that this green line is dipping down, which means we imagine that we will reduce the carbon emission. We will do that basically by adapting to the changes that are happening already by doing things like changes in the way we use land, for example, reducing deforestation, and mitigating our impacts, which means conserving energy and increasing energy efficiency. So, essentially reducing the greenhouse gas emissions basically to reduce the overall impact on radiation balance. It also includes various policy decisions we have to make in terms of every country doing its own thing as a decentralized authority and having some sort of a centralized global authority, for example, in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and which produces the reports that you hear about, like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and what are the various policy tools you have, like emission trading systems and capping and trading carbon emissions and so on, so that eventually you can reach the objective of reducing the overall carbon emissions. But along the way you have to see what happens if you do not have the technology to reduce emissions. What happens if we switch the refrigerant from the HFCs that you are using now to something else? How it will affect different groups of people and different nations differently? How will we track the impacts? Who will pay for the cost? Who is emitting more? Who is emitting less? How do we equalize the agreements to emit or reduce emissions? How do we even track emissions in terms of, let us say, energy intensity of GDPs, carbon intensity of the energies, carbon consumption by the individuals, overall emissions and so on and so forth. So, this is the entire package of bringing together all the climate feedbacks, all human actions, all models and adaptation and mitigation together with policies to determine our own destiny into the future to stay on a sustainable development track for all. So, what does that even mean? How do we make sustainability a global goal? Those are the kind of issues we will discuss in this chapter.